She thought he was rescuing her, but he was already building a cage. First came the emerald silk dress, then the jewelry, the private cars, the guarded restaurants, the oceanfront mansion, and a diamond key around her neck. Lorenzo Falcone called it protection. Clara wanted to believe him, but when he moved her into a luxury penthouse filled with clothes in her exact size, she realized the fairy tale had walls, locks, and armed men at every exit. Let us hold on this wide shot of Clara, paralyzed in a cathedral of old wealth. The camera catches her stark, white knuckles as she clutches a crystal champagne flute. She desperately wishes the cold, marble floor would swallow her cheap dress whole. The heavy scent of expensive perfume and imported silk only makes her dizzy. Her companion Chloe leans close, sharply whispering for her to just smile. You and I have to see this for what it truly is, a terrifying portrait of absolute isolation disguised as a grand celebration. And here is a quiet, brutal truth we must all face. Our deepest insecurities do not simply make us tremble in the shadows. They act as a pulsing beacon in the dark, drawing the exact kind of predators who exist only to feed upon a fragile soul. The camera pushes in tight as Clara murmurs a desperate plea to leave. It is a primal flight response, perfectly natural when you are bleeding in a room full of sharks who smell the copper of your fear. The real tragedy is Chloe's hidden agenda. Clara recently lost her livelihood and is suffocating under debt. Chloe views this glittering gala as a hunting ground to capture a wealthy savior. That vintage champagne burning Clara's throat might as well be battery acid. It is agonizing to watch how blindly we follow the people we trust. We assume they offer safe harbor, but a desperate friend will eagerly shove you into dark waters. The devastating lesson of survival is that when true financial terror takes hold, a human being will surrender every natural instinct for safety just to stay afloat. Notice the sharp lighting contrast between them. Chloe moves with the effortless swagger of a woman who never counts her change. She carelessly tosses Clara a hollow compliment, a calculated anchor to keep her from bolting into the Boston night. This historic ballroom is a theater where ancient wealth dances with ruthless ambition. Clara spent her entire afternoon obsessively memorizing the unspoken laws of high society, weaving a fragile camouflage of manners just to survive the evening. It shatters the heart because the camera knows it is useless. The unyielding lesson of the world is that you can never study your way into true belonging. Wolves never hunt the bold rebels who shatter the rules. They stalk the trembling outsiders who are sweating, trying desperately to play a game they do not understand. Let the focus drift to the shadows. It begins with a heavy, suffocating gaze. Clara shivers visibly as the phantom weight of a stare burns into her skin. It is the ancient alarm of prey sensing the hunter. Across the room stands Lorenzo Falcone. Notice his absolute stillness. While others laugh and preen, he remains perfectly motionless, a dark monolith waiting to strike. His pitch-black eyes lock onto her with clinical hunger. Clara's breath hitches as she foolishly turns to Chloe, asking who he is. You and I must learn from this tragic moment. The human body always recognizes the shadow of the reaper long before the rational mind catches up. When your pulse screams that you are being hunted, you never ask for a name. You simply turn your back and walk away before it is too late. Watch the terror seize Chloe. Her posture snaps rigid like a deer smelling smoke. She drops her voice to a frantic whisper, begging Clara to avert her eyes. She knows Lorenzo is the prince of the dark underbelly, the heir who seized the throne after his father vanished 3 years ago. Yet, here is the cinematic tragedy of the human heart. Despite the panicked warning, Clara lets her gaze drift right back to his. The camera lingers on this fatal connection, capturing the birth of a devastating trauma bond. She is mesmerized by the fire that will burn her to ash. The bitter lesson here is inescapable. We constantly disguise our attraction to the abyss as innocent curiosity, but turning back to meet the cold stare of a monster is always the very first step toward absolute ruin. Every step Lorenzo takes dominates the frame. He radiates a silent, lethal voltage that strips the oxygen from the room. His suit is quietly devastating, effortlessly crushing the loud extravagance of the billionaires around him. As he glides forward, flanked by two guards, the panicked crowd parts to clear his path. Now look at Chloe. The instant she realizes the wolf is descending, she abandons her friend, muttering a hollow excuse about a drink as she flees. It is the masterful isolation of the prey, leaving Clara totally defenseless. This moment teaches us a brutal truth. Anyone will stand beside you when the music is loud and the wine is flowing freely. True, unbreakable loyalty is only ever revealed in the suffocating, undeniable presence of absolute terror. The camera frames a claustrophobic close-up. Clara is trapped in sheer terror as his massive frame eclipses her light. She breathes his earthy cologne, a heavy scent engineered to mask the iron smell of violence. Her trembling eyes trace the cruel scar on his jaw, finally meeting pitch-black pupils that devour light. Listen to the dark brilliance of his opening line. He does not ask a polite question. He leans in and flatly states, "You are not enjoying yourself." It is a stunning display of psychological warfare, erasing her reality before she can even speak. This is a terrifying lesson we must never ignore. The very second someone bypasses your own voice and dares to dictate your internal emotions to you, they are silently laying the heavy foundation for total ownership of your life. Hides behind the fragile, polite script we use when cornered by power. She attempts to weave a graceful exit, but Lorenzo shatters her defense. He softly calls her a liar, noting she has tracked the exit doors 3 times since he arrived. It is chilling how deeply he has dissected her panic. Notice how he blindly plucks a glass from a passing waiter without breaking his hypnotic gaze, a casual flex of total dominion. Pushed to the edge, Clara tilts her chin up and asks if she should be afraid. The camera lingers on her trembling lip, exposing her false bravery. Here is the tragic truth. You can wear a fierce face all you want, but true monsters do not care about fake armor. They simply wait to feast on the desperate, beating terror you are trying so hard to hide from the rest of the world. A cruel, amused smile plays across Lorenzo's lips. To him, her false defiance is simply high-end entertainment. He shatters a boundary, letting her first roll softly off his tongue. When she gasps, asking how he knows it, he coolly explains that he studies the anomalies in his city. Clara apologizes for her cheap dress, trapped in the anxiety of class. But Lorenzo executes a devastating pivot. He murmurs that he watched her give her only genuine smile to the tired coat check clerk, ignoring the elite. He is showing her that he truly sees her soul. It is the ultimate, fatal seduction. We all carry an aching desperation to be intimately understood. A master manipulator will gladly take that very desire and forge it into the heaviest chain you will ever wear. Clara attempts a feeble defense of Chloe, but Lorenzo clinically dissects her friend's greedy motives without an ounce of pity. He whispers that he holds the dirty secrets of everyone in the room, weaponizing his own paranoia into absolute power. Slowly, he extends his hand, telling her they are going to dance. It looks like a romantic courtesy, but it is an ironclad command. Clara's internal alarms are deafening. We watch her survival instinct battle an intoxicating dark curiosity. She whispers that she is a clumsy dancer, essentially handing over her sword in surrender. We must recognize the tragedy unfolding here. When your gut begs you to flee, but your ego becomes drunk on the focused attention of a dangerous man, that ego will march you straight into a dark cage and gladly hand him the key. In a room spinning with fear, his unshakable calm becomes her only anchor. The camera captures the tragic moment. Clara places her trembling fingers into his palm. She registers the unexpected warmth of his touch, a jarring contrast to his ruthless reputation. Right here, the dark foundation of Stockholm Syndrome is laid. Her exhausted brain cannot reconcile the rumored monster with this tender contact. He glides her onto the marble floor, dismissing his guards with a mere twitch of his jaw. His hands settle possessively on her lower back, invading her space as he whispers for her to follow his lead. The psychological surrender is absolute. The most dangerous predators do not use physical force. They simply craft a masterful psychological maze where yielding under their darkness feels like the safest possible harbor you have left. Watch the cinematography of their dance. Lorenzo navigates the floor with a terrifying, predatory grace. Instantly, Clara feels the room shift. The elites who treated her like a ghost are now watching her in awe simply because the apex predator has claimed her. He is feeding her a highly intoxicating dose of his dark power. He leans in, whispering that everyone is dying to know who she is. When she breathlessly asks what story they should tell, he smiles and says the narrative is entirely up to her. It is a masterpiece of manipulation, offering a beautiful illusion of control. Let us burn this brutal lesson into our minds. The most inescapable prison in the world is the one where the captive is utterly convinced that they designed and built their own cell. Let us hold on this frame for a moment, because the tragedy unfolding here is suffocating. The warm glow of the ballroom fades behind them, the music barely a whisper. Clara attempts to raise a fragile boundary, her voice trembling as she whispers that she really ought to leave. Watch Lorenzo. Not a single muscle in his face shifts. His heavy palm remains anchored to her spine, a silent command, steering her away from the safety of the lights and out into the biting autumn wind. As he guides her onto the desolate terrace, he casually dismantles her friend Chloe, painting the girl as a selfish parasite. He plays the noble protector while severing her only lifeline. The brutal lesson we must remember is this: when a predator intends to consume your reality, the first thing they do is quietly cut the ropes tying you to the safe world. The camera pushes in on Clara as she shivers against the cold railing. The glittering Boston skyline reflects in her wide eyes, highlighting the agonizing chasm between his untouchable wealth and her crumbling life. Before she can form a single word, Lorenzo slides his heavy, tailored coat from his shoulders and drapes it over her bare skin. It plays like a sweeping romantic gesture, but look at his eyes. It is purely territorial. He is wrapping her in his scent, a physical brand of ownership. Then the trap snaps shut. He softly mentions the massive gambling debts her friend's father owes to violent men. He holds all the power. The tragic truth here is heavy. A grand favor from a dangerous man is never an act of grace. It is simply the down payment on a debt they will never let you settle. We need to look closely at Clara in this shadow-filled lighting. She is drowning in her own life, crushed beneath unpaid bills, and starved for just one night of beautiful escape. That raw vulnerability makes her the perfect prey. When Lorenzo murmurs that her friend only brought her here as bait for loan sharks, he is doing more than spreading poison. He is launching a calculated strike on her entire foundation. By exposing the corruption of everyone else, he casts himself as her solitary savior. Tears well in her eyes as she confesses she only wanted a break from the endless rejection. The heartbreaking lesson we all have to face is this: the very second we become desperate enough to flee our own reality, we become completely blind to the smiling monsters waiting for us in the dark. Notice the tragic shift in his body language right here. Clara drops her gaze, a flush of deep shame creeping up her neck as she admits she just wanted to play dress up. Lorenzo softens his sharp posture. He looks into her eyes with tenderness and whispers that she is only human. It strikes her right in the heart. This is exactly how ruthless men manufacture intimacy on command. While a string quartet sighs in the background, he constructs a flawless, invisible bubble around them. Then the tenderness vanishes. He states they are leaving, a command, not a question. When she stammers that she does not know him, his cold arrogance flares. He steps into her space and says she knows exactly who he is. The tragedy is plain. We often mistake a predator's overwhelming confidence for a protective shield, totally missing the bars of the cage. You and I must pause the scene again to witness the absolute elegance of this trap. He takes her shivering, justified fear and twists it into a romantic test of courage. When she slowly places her trembling fingers into his palm, she genuinely believes she is making a bold, empowered choice. She is completely blind to the dark grooming. The camera follows them gliding down dimly lit concrete service corridors. Terrified staff instantly drop their eyes to the floor as Lorenzo passes. Clara nervously laughs, asking if she should be worried. Lorenzo does not smile. He looks dead ahead and simply says yes. And the true horror? She laughs again. Manipulators weaponize the blunt truth to appear undeniably trustworthy. The chilling lesson is that an honest villain is not less lethal. They just know how to make you gladly walk yourself to the slaughter. Stepping through those heavy oak doors into the smoke-filled back room marks Clara's irreversible descent. The lighting shifts to a harsh, shadowed glow. The air is thick with the stench of dirty money, packed with hardened men and women who look entirely hollow. The exact second Lorenzo crosses the threshold, the conversation dies. A suffocating silence drops over the room. Clara physically shrinks, crushed by the terrifying regality of his absolute power. Lorenzo slides his heavy hand down to the curve of her lower back. It is not to soothe her. He is deliberately broadcasting his ownership to every violent predator staring at them. She is officially marked. It is a tragic realization. When a dark, powerful man publicly stakes his claim on you, he is not lifting you up to his level. He is permanently erasing your freedom. Clara quietly asks the bartender for water, her hands shaking slightly as she tries to keep her head above the rising tide. But the bitter irony is obvious in her posture. She is already drowning in his undertow. Glancing around at the terrifying men watching her, she nervously whispers a question about his associates. Lorenzo does not blink. With eyes like winter ice, he coldly dismisses every man in that room as worthless, telling her none are fit to speak her name. To Clara, it feels like a dizzying romantic compliment. But it is a devastating psychological strike. By elevating her above his crew, he strokes her fragile ego while severing any chance she has to cry for help. Here is the dark life lesson. When a man convinces you that everyone else in his world is garbage, it is only a matter of time before he looks at you the exact same way. You can see Clara's body betraying her. Her breath is shallow, her posture rigid with terror, yet her sick, romantic fascination with this dark figure is already overriding her survival instincts. Right before our eyes, the toxic roots of a trauma bond begin to choke her. Searching for rational logic, she asks if he makes a habit of rescuing stray women. Lorenzo's response is a masterclass in manipulation. He locks onto her gaze and softly swears she is the single, unprecedented exception to his cold reality. He paints a tragic fantasy where she alone possesses the power to thaw his frozen heart. Let me give you the harsh truth about falling a dangerous man. Being the chosen one of a monster is never a glorious badge of honor. It is simply a brightly glowing target painted right between your shoulder blades. Let us watch this brutal collision unfold because the emotional violence is heavy. Clara's intoxicated friend, Chloe, suddenly stumbles into the doorway. Chloe's date takes one panicked look at Lorenzo and literally drags the girl backward into the hallway, fleeing in absolute terror. Lorenzo does not move a single muscle. He keeps his predatory gaze anchored softly on Clara. When Clara looks down and quietly admits she and Chloe have grown apart, Lorenzo pounces. He plays the deep philosopher, murmuring that extreme pressure always reveals true cowards. He masterfully uses her friend's retreat to carve himself out as her only unshakable rock. The bitter truth lives right here. When a man constantly highlights how your loved ones are failing you, he is not offering comfort. He is quietly burning away the competition for your absolute loyalty. It is heartbreaking to witness how surgically he exploits her lifelong history of abandonment. Clara was thrown away by her ex-boyfriend and even her own mother the very second her money ran dry. Unconditional loyalty is a foreign concept to her, leaving her tragically desperate for a dark savior. When she nervously asks if he is testing her character, the corner of his mouth lifts into a slow smile. He whispers that he is only revealing his own. What follows is not a romantic exchange. It is a clinical, cold-blooded extraction of her deepest traumas. He coaxes out stories of her wrecked childhood and broken dreams. Listen to me on this one. A predator does not ask deep questions because they cherish your soul. They ask so they can map your open wounds, finding the exact emotional levers to pull when they finally lock the cage. To keep the hook buried deep, Lorenzo begins tossing her curated fragments of his own soul. He speaks softly about his passion for midnight sailing and rare poetry, painting himself as a tortured intellectual rather than a violent criminal. It is a beautiful, fragile illusion. That cozy mirage shatters the second judge as Harrison approaches their dark corner. Lorenzo remains seated, his posture dripping with cold disrespect. When the powerful judge clears his throat and asks for an introduction to Clara, Lorenzo does not even look up. He shoots the man down with a single razor-sharp word. No, the air leaves the room. He is proving to Clara that his shadow falls high above the law. Here is the terrifying reality check we must process. A monster who shields you from the lesser evils of the world is still, at the end of the day, a very hungry monster. The suffocating tension left in the judge's wake acts as pure adrenaline for Clara. She leans across the table, whispering that he was being incredibly rude. But the camera catches the feverish spark in her eyes. She is utterly intoxicated by his violent protectiveness. This dangerous thrill is the exact soil where a dark trauma bond takes root. Lorenzo leans in so close his warm breath grazes the pulse on her neck. In a low voice, he declares that every man in this room needs to learn she belongs exclusively to him. It is a horrifying claim of ownership over a human life, yet instead of bolting for the door, she closes her eyes and melts into his shadow. We must face a very dark psychological truth here. Our desperate, aching craving to feel safe can so easily trick us into begging to be entirely owned by the villain. Let's freeze the frame right here, because you and I need to study this exact moment. For years, Clara wore her lonely, bone-deep exhaustion like a heavy suit of armor, but his dark, possessive whisper just picked the rusted lock on her mind. The camera pushes in slowly. She stares into his eyes, desperately searching for a cruel joke. But when a predator zeroes in on you, the air leaves the room. She whispered that he didn't even know her. He just anchored her trembling wrist in his hand and promised he knew enough. And then the lighting shifts. She smiled. Here is a simple truth about life. The deadliest moment isn't when the steel cage slams shut. It is the exact second you look at the warden and decide you are just too tired to keep fighting. Watch how the shadows swallow them in this shot. That fragile little smile wasn't just surrender. It was a signed invitation for him to completely rewire her psychology. She is so hypnotized by his gravity that she totally misses the camera flashing in the dark alley. A ghost in the background, documenting the exact mistake that will destroy her life. Lorenzo guides her through a hidden exit. Suddenly, heavily armed guards step out from the fog. Anyone else would bolt. But Clara? Her shoulders just drop. She rationalizes the metal and violence. It is a terrifying life lesson to observe. Once you accept a predator into your life, you will literally convince yourself that the guns pointed at your head are just there to keep you safe from the cold. Instead of running from the hitman, she just lets the surreal sickness of this criminal underworld wash over her skin. A flawless black Bentley glides through the rain. The driver bows his head down like Lorenzo is royalty. When he casually suggests dinner, Clara's stomach violently tightens. She had been surviving on half-eaten sandwiches, drowning in the stress of a normal life she is now throwing away. Lorenzo guides her into the ridiculously soft leather of the back seat. The camera catches his faint, terrifying smile in the rearview mirror. He won. He is stepping up as her sole provider. It is a harsh lesson we all eventually learn. Extreme comfort is the ultimate anesthetic. It numbs your survival instincts so deeply that you forget you ever had the power to fly away. The camera stays incredibly tight on them inside the car. Notice how the thick glass partition slides up, sealing them off from the driver. It is the classic isolation chamber of an abuser. Clara suddenly realizes the sheer weight of his heavy, expensive jacket draped over her shoulders. It is a physical claim on her body. Panic flares in her eyes. She tries to shrug it off, but he gently, firmly tells her to keep it. His gaze never wavers, tracking her every shallow breath. She tries to use sarcasm to build a wall, asking if kidnapping women is his usual Tuesday routine. He ignores the joke, flatly pointing out how terrified she is. "I am just cautious," she lies. It is absurd. Sarcasm is a pathetic shield to hold up against a monster sitting with you in the dark. Now comes the scene that is truly agonizing to watch. The lighting goes completely dark, save for passing street lamp haze hitting his face. He leans in, demanding a piece of her soul. "Tell me something true," he commands, hunting for the emotional fractures in her mind. Clara lets out this awful, shaking laugh, thrown by how easily he shatters boundaries. "Give me something real," he pushes. The quiet intimacy of the car becomes a psychological weapon, and she breaks. Loneliness has hollowed her out so deeply that she bleeds out her darkest secret. She is terrified of ending up like her mother, broke and alone. It teaches us a brutal life lesson. Never hand a manipulator the map to your wounds. He now holds the exact blueprint to her total destruction. You and I need to pause the tape right here and appreciate the terrifying genius of his next move. It is a masterclass in emotional mirroring. "What happened to her dreams?" he asks, his voice dropping into a perfectly calibrated tone of empathy. Clara confesses her mother threw away her freedom for a worthless man. Lorenzo absorbs this. He instantly realizes her fierce independence is just a trauma response. Then he drops his own calculated sob story. "I never wanted this life," he whispers, staring at his ghostly reflection in the wet glass. He claims he wanted to be an architect. He repaints himself from a ruthless killer into a tragic victim of circumstance. The life lesson here is chilling. The most dangerous lie is the one wrapped in a shared pain.
And she buys every single word.
There is nothing quite like a tragic origin story to cement a trauma bond forever. The camera slowly circles them as he casually drops the bomb that his father was murdered by his best friend. It is a calculated shock tactic to short-circuit her logic completely. "Some choices are not choices at all," he tells her, washing the blood from his own hands. The Bentley idles outside a dark, unmarked door in the north end. He guides her out into the freezing night, firmly taking control of the environment. "My grandfather opened this place in 1956, he says softly. As they step inside, the flickering amber lights and thick nostalgia swallow them whole. Life teaches us that predators always control the lighting. It is designed to make her forget what mortal danger she is actually in. Now the director brings in the sweet, harmless old man to completely dismantle her remaining survival instincts. A silver-haired patriarch named Giovanni intercepts them, wrapping Lorenzo in a warm hug that makes the monster look like a gentle boy. Lorenzo introduces him as his godfather. Then the old man delivers the fatal blow. He loudly announces that his precious godson has never brought a woman here. "You must be very special," Giovanni insists. The camera catches the flush of heat climbing Clara's neck. Her starving ego eats up the fake validation. They guide her to a dark booth, and Giovanni quickly takes away her menu. The lesson is quiet but deadly. Control doesn't always look like a steel cage. Sometimes it looks like someone kindly making every single choice for you. The sickest joke of this entire scene is how they frame the total loss of her freedom as some kind of five-star luxury. "I will take care of everything," the sweet godfather promises. The dining room looks warm and full of life, but if you look at the background, Lorenzo's armed guards are quietly locking down the exits. Clara is totally blind to it. She smiles, whispering about how warm his godfather is. "He helped raise me after my mother died of cancer," Lorenzo whispers, twisting the blade of vulnerability. He paints a beautiful picture of Giovanni teaching him to read. The life lesson here is terrifyingly simple. Pity is a weapon. The tragic orphan routine is the deadliest trick because it hijacks a woman's natural instinct to protect the very wolf preparing to devour her. In a few heavy glasses of red wine, and the last of her mental defenses simply wash away. The table fills with rich food, and Clara spills everything. She hands him the master keys to her mind, confessing her failed jobs, her broke exes, and her desperate life. In return, he feeds her this incredibly fake, poetic sadness about how lonely it is at the top of an empire he never asked for. Right before our eyes, the trauma bond sinks its teeth in. She stops seeing a ruthless killer and starts seeing a tragic, misunderstood artist. "You are not what I expected," she whispers, her guard fully dropped. It is a hard truth of human nature. We see what we desperately want to see. Watching her fall for the beautiful illusion is like watching a train crash in slow, heartbreaking motion. Let's pause again, you and I, to break down how perfectly he tests the waters right here. "What did you expect?" he asks, the lighting catching the hard lines of his jaw. Clara admits she was waiting for a cold, heartless monster. This is where he proves his absolute mastery over the scene. "Make no mistake, I have done things that would terrify you," he warns her, leaning heavily into the danger by reminding her he is a murderer, yet acting perfectly gentle. He makes her feel completely unique. "Then why show me this side of you?" she asks. He reaches across the table. His cold fingers find the frantic, racing pulse at her wrist. The lesson is chilling. A true predator doesn't hide his teeth. He shows them to you, then makes you feel incredibly special for not being bitten. "Because from the exact moment I saw you, I knew you were different," he murmurs. It is the ultimate narcissistic death blow. He frames her as the one shining angel who can save his tortured soul. You can practically see the conflict tearing her apart. Every human instinct is screaming at her to run, but the darkness pulls her in. Just as she leans forward, the spell shatters. His phone violently vibrates against the wood. In a fraction of a second, the tragic poet vanishes. The cold, terrifying Mafia Boss mask slams right back onto his face. He abruptly stands to handle some bloody crisis, but the trap holds tight. Giovanni seamlessly glides over with sweet drinks. It reminds us of a dark truth. The cage doesn't need the warden present to keep the poor bird locked inside forever. Let us pause the frame right here, because you and I need to examine the Godfather's devastating role in this tragedy. Giovanni plays his part flawlessly, sitting in the shadows, feigning absolute shock that his violent godson is suddenly captivated by a total stranger. It is a brilliant surgical manipulation. He feeds Clara a beautifully tragic backstory, describing a passionate boy whose soul was shattered by his father's murder. He paints this brutal mobster as a wounded bird and Clara as his only salvation. The camera lingers on her softening eyes, capturing the exact moment the emotional trap clicks shut. We often forget a simple truth. The absolute most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in a tragic backstory, because they weaponize your empathy and make you desperate to fix the exact person destined to break you. The heavy oak door swings open, and Lorenzo steps back into the restaurant. The charming architect facade is gone, replaced by a man practically vibrating with suppressed predatory violence. The warm amber lighting suddenly feels harsh, casting sharp shadows across his jaw. He does not ask Clara if she is ready to leave. He simply dictates that the evening is over. As they move toward the exit, the Godfather's hand rests gently on her spine, guiding her right into the abyss. Out on the street, the air is freezing. Lorenzo's bodyguards are rigid, hands hovering over concealed weapons, turning a romantic evening into an active war zone. Clara's heart hammers against her ribs as the illusion shatters. It is a harsh reality to swallow. Sometimes the exact moment you feel the most cherished is the very second before the steel trap snaps shut on your ankle. Logically, any sane person would be weeping with relief to escape a looming mafia shootout. But watch the subtle slump of Clara's shoulders as she slides into the leather seats of his armored car. She is genuinely disappointed the romance was interrupted. That is the creeping, quiet tragedy of her addiction taking root. Then the spell shatters. Lorenzo stares straight ahead and casually recites her home address. The shadows in the car hide his eyes, but his voice is devoid of remorse as he admits he ran a complete background check during their charity gala. When she angrily calls him a stalker, he smoothly rebrands his invasion of privacy as a protective measure. We must learn to see things clearly. If a person has to completely violate your boundaries just to prove you are safe, they are never going to be the one who actually protects you. Look closely at the geometry of this scene with me, because the power dynamic is visually suffocating. Lorenzo does not just list her details. He recites her failures like a coroner reading a grim report. 27. Unemployed. Fired. He strips away her armor word by word, leaving her completely exposed in the passenger seat. Through the tinted, bulletproof dark glass, her impoverished neighborhood looks even bleaker. Flickering streetlights cast a sickly yellow glow over the cracked pavement. Sitting beside a man with bottomless wealth and a frightening absence of morality, she has never felt so utterly powerless. It is a bitter, agonizing lesson about the world. Poverty does not just empty your bank account, it systematically strips away your defenses until a terrifying monster holding a heavy checkbook starts to look exactly like a guardian angel. The armored engine cuts off, leaving a silence so heavy it threatens to crush her lungs. Clara whispers that this is her stop, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. Lorenzo slowly turns, his dark eyes scanning her decaying apartment building like a starving wolf, evaluating a flimsy wooden fence. He states he is walking her to her door, and the hard set of his jaw confirms it is not up for debate. They ascend 3 flights of stained concrete stairs. His massive silhouette consumes the narrow hallway, making it feel exactly like a descending coffin. Her hands tremble violently as she fumbles with her keys, whispering a frail thank you. He leans in, his breath grazing her ear, hoping the night was weird in a good way. The takeaway here is vital. When a predator shows you exactly how much power they hold, never stick around to see how they plan to use it. If you want to witness a brilliant woman willingly architect her own ruin, watch this single, devastating frame. Lorenzo bridges the final gap between them, employing the most ancient weapon in existence, a slow, calculated physical touch. His fingers lightly graze her temple, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Clara whispers that this is a terrible idea, but her fluttering eyelashes and leaning posture completely betray her. Men like Lorenzo do not hear the word no, they only smell hesitation. He murmurs that he will see her tomorrow, casually erasing her free will with a velvet tone. You want to reach through the screen and shake her, but her tragic flaw is deeply human. We are all so profoundly starved to be seen, to be touched, and to feel cherished that we will eagerly invite the wolf into our home if he simply promises to keep us company in the dark. Stay with me here, because this is the exact frame where the tragedy becomes irreversible. Lorenzo murmurs that wisdom is vastly overrated, systematically dismantling her last shred of common sense with a quiet, arrogant laugh. He slowly drags his thumb across her trembling lower lip, effectively short-circuiting her logic, before casually announcing a car will collect her tomorrow. She weakly protests that she never agreed to a second date, but the triumphant gleam in his eyes says, everything. The war is already over. Clara practically flees into her apartment, her hands shaking so violently she struggles to slide the deadbolt. She should be paralyzed with fear, but her chest is heaving with intoxicating adrenaline. Never forget this hard truth. The most profoundly toxic people will never kick your door off its hinges. They just whisper until you willingly hand them the keys. The camera slowly pans across her miserable reality, and you cannot help but mourn for her. The peeling wallpaper and the towering stack of final notice bills scream of relentless, grinding failure. And then there is the stark contrast of Lorenzo's immaculately tailored cashmere jacket, abandoned on her sagging couch. Instead of immediately boxing up the dangerous artifact, she buries her face in the expensive fabric, inhaling the intoxicating scent of cedar and gunpowder. Her intuition is screaming that this man is a killer, but the cavernous loneliness in her soul screams significantly louder. She stands in the darkened window, watching his red taillights bleed into the night, already desperately craving his return. It is a terrifying reality of the human condition. When you have been starving for a way out for years, even a plate of poison starts to look like a feast. Now we witness the psychology shift from naive romance to something genuinely disturbing. As Lorenzo's car idles at the intersection, Clara spots a completely blacked out sedan creeping out from the alleyway, trailing him like a shadow. She instantly processes the threat. Assassins are hunting the man who just bought her dinner. Yet, instead of bolting her door and weeping with gratitude that she escaped the crossfire, her chest tightens with absolute panic for his safety. Her screen lights up with an encrypted text from him commanding her to sleep well. A rational person would call the authorities. Clara just smiles, a dark, thrilling flush rising to her cheeks, and types back a single word of sweet compliance. The lesson here is sobering. Empathy is a beautiful, necessary trait, but unconditionally giving it to someone who views you as a possession will only guarantee your destruction. You and I have to dissect the quiet horror of the morning after, when the intoxicating adrenaline finally burns off. Lorenzo replies to her compliance with two chilling words. Good girl. It makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because he is treating her like a prized greyhound. Clara wakes up to the dull grey light of a rainy Tuesday, and the weight of reality crashes down. She is entertaining a mafia boss who stalks her. She attempts to anchor herself, furiously emailing resumes and staring blankly at her severely overdrawn bank account. But the screen blurs. She keeps checking her silent phone, paralyzed by the secret, humiliating terror that he might have already forgotten her. This is the tragic frailty of human nature. It is terrifyingly easy to abandon every single one of your core principles when the wrong person temporarily makes you feel like a god. Just as the clock strikes noon, the director completely shatters her fragile grip on reality. A sharply dressed courier knocks on her battered door, presenting a massive, sleek black box. Lorenzo is essentially breaching the walls of her safe haven using the sheer force of his wealth. Beneath the tissue paper lies a breathtaking emerald green silk gown, diamond-encrusted heels, and a pair of flawless teardrop earrings. It plays out like a childhood fairy tale, but the camera angle tells us it is a gilded cage. He is not courting her, he is outfitting her. As Clara lifts the heavy silk, her squalid apartment simply ceases to exist. The fabric promises an instant, miraculous escape from her suffocating poverty. We must always remember this timeless truth. The devil rarely announces his arrival with fire and brimstone. He usually knocks politely, carrying exactly what you always wanted. Hidden beneath the shimmering silk is a thick, cream-colored envelope containing a single sentence from Lorenzo. He casually notes how devastating she would look wearing absolutely nothing. The sheer arrogance of it should repulse her, yet a deep, betraying flush spreads across Clara's collarbones. For one agonizing, suspended second, her survival instincts scream at her to burn the box and vanish into the city. But the siren song of the fantasy is overpowering. She presses the cold emeralds to her ears, captivated by the powerful, expensive stranger staring back from her cracked mirror. Her phone suddenly buzzes, a frantic text from her best friend Chloe, begging her to stay away from the cartel. Clara stares at the warning, then calmly powers the device down, severing her only lifeline. The lesson is grim. When you start hiding the truth from those who love you, The predator has already won. Walk with me through this final, devastating sequence because it perfectly encapsulates the entire tragedy. As the evening shadows stretch across the floor, Clara slips into the emerald silk and the heavy jewels. She stands before the glass, completely unrecognizable. She looks like royalty, bathed in an untouchable, wealthy glow, yet her eyes betray the grim reality. She is simply playing dress-up for a violent kingpin. It is a fabricated, dangerous armor designed to conceal the terrified, broke girl shivering underneath. But as the heavy purr of an engine vibrates through her floorboards exactly at 8 o'clock, she makes her choice, and she takes a trembling breath, steps out of her poverty, and walks willingly into the inferno. It is a profound, tragic truth about life. The most impossible cages to escape are never constructed of iron and steel. They are the ones we happily lock ourselves inside. Let S freeze the frame right here. You and I need to truly see the psychological warfare unfolding inside this suffocating space. The camera pushes in on Clara as she slides into the heavy leather of the tinted sedan, immediately swallowed by the shadows. And who is waiting? In the dark, Lorenzo, the architect of her ruin. Notice the way the streetlights slice across his face as he gives her a slow, absolute sweep of his eyes, branding his ownership right onto her skin. She whispers that the jewels are too much. He does not blink. He reaches across, his knuckles brushing the cold emerald at her throat. It is a terrifying, brilliant power play. The lesson here is brutal. The most dangerous men do not demand submission. They quietly buy it, proving their control has no limits. Watch her breathing change. That single cold touch against her collarbone sends a vicious rush of adrenaline straight into her veins. Lorenzo sits perfectly still, a marble statue, weaponizing his own dark elegance to strip away her final defenses. She desperately grasps for reality, asking where they are going, and his answer lands like a heavy iron gate closing. His private estate. He coats the threat in velvet, calling it an intimate dinner. Moving a target into a fortified sanctuary is a master predator-esque maneuver. Yet the heartbreaking twist, look at her eyes. She is thrilled to be dragged into his shadows. Right here, her fractured mind rewrites her damnation into romance. It shows us how quickly the human heart will betray itself just to survive the night. Let us walk through this scene together. Right as the steel jaws of the trap finally snap shut, Lorenzo leans back into the shadows, his eyes drinking in the erratic rise and fall of Clara's chest. She looks up at him, eyes wide and glassy, and asks the fatal question, should she be afraid? The camera holds on his face as he delivers a chilling masterclass in deception, whispering that she has never been safer. He locks down her physical safety while slowly choking out her free will. Deep down, Clara knows this man drowns the world in blood, but the trauma bond is already tight. As the car leaves the glowing city for the empty coastline, she surrenders her survival instinct. It quietly teaches us that sometimes the deadliest traps are the ones that make us feel the safest. Look closely at his hands. He traces the delicate lines of her palm, fabricating a heartbreaking illusion of intimacy, playing her emotions like a beautifully tuned instrument. Out of nowhere, he whispers about her hidden passion for writing. Her head snaps up. How could he know? He offers a smooth, practiced smile, blaming a forgotten conversation, completely burying the reality of his relentless surveillance, and she falls, leaning into his shoulder, confessing her stories of fierce women escaping danger. The bitter irony drips from every word. This broken girl is writing other heroines, blind to the monster turning the key on her cage. We all have blind spots, but the deadliest ones are the beautiful, comforting lies we desperately want to believe. The director does not let us look away as Lorenzo pries open her mind. He is not satisfied with her body. He demands the absolute devotion of her soul. His voice drops to a low hum over the engine, asking what haunts her when the lights go out. Clara, completely stripped of her armor, confesses her crushing fear of being abandoned to nothing. Lorenzo leans into the silence, his eyes heavy and dark, asking what she will dream of tonight. When she breathlessly admits he is the only thing on her mind, a slow, terrifying smile claims his face. He owns her now. This is the hardest frame to endure. It proves a horrific human truth. We will gladly hand the knife to our own murderer as long as he promises to guard our door against the dark. Stick with me as the camera tilts up to reveal her new reality. The black sedan creeps up a winding cliffside road, stopping before a jagged fortress of glass and steel, hovering dangerously over the black, roaring sea. Clara's breath hitches. Her hands tremble as she looks at the massive structure, asking if this is home. Lorenzo smiles, whispering that he enjoys the silence. But look deep into the edges of the frame, the silent armed men cloaked in the fog, the cold glass of security lenses tracking her pulse. He guides her inside, his large hand pressing heavy against the small of her back. That touch is not romance, it is a brand. The bitter, crying truth of this scene is inescapable. A gilded cage is still a tomb, even when the golden bars catch the moonlight perfectly. Step into the grand hall, where the lighting shifts from moonlight to a soft, deceptive gold. Lorenzo has built a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He balances intimidating, sky-high glass overlooking a violent sea with rich, warm mahogany, crafting a flawless illusion of a sanctuary. Blood-bought art hangs quietly on the walls, masking the violence of his empire. Clara wanders like a ghost, mesmerized by the tragic beauty. Before she can catch her breath, his housekeeper materializes from the shadows, quiet as a grave, announcing their meal. Lorenzo dismisses her with a velvet voice, but focus on the housekeeper's blank, haunted eyes. It teaches us a chilling lesson. True complicity does not always roar. Sometimes it just quietly sets the dinner table for the devil. As the heavy doors click shut, Lorenzo begins the tour, a calculated, elegant dance of grooming. He leads her through the vast, immaculate kitchen and the shadowed gym, carefully carving out the character of a complex, misunderstood man. Then, the grand reveal. He pushes open the tall oak doors of his library. This is where he unsheathes his sharpest blade. Clara's eyes catch the edge of architectural blueprints scattered on a heavy desk. She touches the paper, asking if the lines are his. The camera lingers as a slow, beautifully tragic flash of vulnerability washes over his face. It is absolute perfection. The hardest lesson to learn in this life is that monsters rarely show their teeth when a single, perfectly timed fake tear works so much better. He releases a heavy, poetic sigh, dismissing the sketches as the forgotten dreams of a younger man. Clara leans close, the soft curve of her neck entirely exposed, whispering that he could have built beautiful things. Loren stands dead still, his predatory eyes burning into her, drinking down her innocent admiration. His voice goes rough as he murmurs about a poor neighborhood, a safe harbor for broken kids requested by an old friend. He smooths the edges of the paper with methodical, terrifying gentleness. It is a breathtaking lie. In a single heartbeat, Clara's vision of a blood-stained monster burns away. We are always so tragically eager to forgive the beast, as long as he looks us in the eye and swears he is only bleeding for our sake. Before the dust can settle on his beautiful lie, his hand wraps around her forearm, pulling her toward an iron-wrought door. He whispers that she will adore what waits inside. The door swings wide, revealing a dimly lit sanctuary of glass and silence. Hundreds of fragile first edition books sit trapped behind locked displays. It is the hoard of a silent king, collecting priceless things simply because he can. Clara lets out a fractured gasp, her fingers hovering over a glass case. Lorenzo punches a code, the glass sliding open, and tells her she may hold it. Notice the quiet devastation here. True power is not forcing someone to stay. It is making them believe they are the ones choosing not to leave. By handing her the keys, he crowns her queen of his shadows. Clara cradles the delicate spine like a dying bird, entirely swept into his grand tragedy. She asks, almost in a whisper, how this collection began. Lorenzo instantly pulls the trigger on his own grief. His voice drops into a gravelly hush, speaking of a dead mother and a desperate need to escape into poetry. Bare childhood trauma is a dangerous weapon, perfectly designed to unlock a woman's desperate urge to heal a broken man. He drifts through the room, attaching a bleeding, fabricated memory to every shelf. Then, he pulls a slender volume from the dark. He locks onto her eyes, murmuring that he bought this one just for her. The last tether snaps. Clara is falling into the abyss. It proves that the most lethal poisons always taste like sweet nostalgia. Look closely at the book resting in her shaking hands. You and I can see the horrible irony echoing off the walls. It is a collection of dark, twisted fairy tales. Clara stares at the cover, utterly breathless that a man could read the secret language of her heart so perfectly. He steps closer, whispering that she carries the exact same fire as those tragic heroines who refuse to die. As he gently reclaims the book, his fingertips drag deliberately across her knuckles, letting the heat sear through her skin. Her mind spirals, desperately mistaking a monster as flawless, mirroring for a soulmate's touch. This is the cruel poetry of the captive heart. She rewrites her executioner into her savior. The room falls dead silent, broken only when he whispers, "It is time to eat." You and I have probably seen this cinematic setup before. The camera pans across a dark, windswept ocean terrace. Lorenzo orchestrates a masterpiece of sensory overload. Vintage wine catches the low light, and the atmosphere feels flawless. Then the inevitable cut. His phone vibrates against the mahogany table, and the romantic lead evaporates. His jaw hardens into stone. He is the ruthless kingpin once more, striding away into the shadows and leaving Clara unanchored in the heavy breeze. That brutal psychological whiplash is precisely what keeps a person desperate for the warmth to return. The harsh lesson here is simple. When someone meticulously builds the perfect fantasy just for you, they are usually hiding a deep nightmare right behind the velvet curtain. The camera centers on Clara, staring out at the crashing waves. She is desperately trying to shrink her rational fears against the vast, terrifying expanse of the water. She is so adrift in the sound of the tide that she misses the shift in the shadows. Suddenly, Lorenzo is right behind her. His presence is heavy, oppressive like a sudden drop in gravity. He stares at the black water and quietly remarks that the ocean does not care about human problems. It is a chilling projection of his own hollow soul. Yet Clara, sensing the darkness pulling him under, softly asks if he is all right, slipping instantly into the caretaker role. The real tragedy here is a timeless one. Trying to mend a deeply broken person will almost always shatter you in the very same process. Lorenzo clinically mentions a situation with a rival crew, his voice devoid of human inflection. He casually tells her not to worry. It is a terrifying sprinkle of violence right over the dessert plates. He drops the detail purely to spike her adrenaline, reminding her she is dining with an apex predator. His eyes scan her panicked face, and he asks if his criminal empire bothers her. Clara lifts her chin. She tries to be brave, admitting that it should bother anyone. You expect his temper to flare, but instead, an amused smile creeps across his face. He steps dangerously close, letting his sheer body heat trap her against the terrace railing. Life teaches us a brutal truth in moments like this. Sometimes our own defiant pride easily blinds us to the cage we are willingly stepping into. Let us pause and look at this piece by piece. His hand reaches up to softly cup her cheek. That deliberate motion is the fatal strike. The gentle touch of a known killer completely scrambles the brain, weaving pure terror into sudden affection. He traces her lip and whispers that he should probably send her home. It is a sick illusion of choice. Clara stares back and asks if that is what he really wants. Lorenzo locks his cold eyes with hers and confesses he wants to own her entirely. Then he demands to know what she desires, forcing her to choose her own capture. The lesson here is terrifying but undeniably true. Real predators never drag you into the dark. They simply hold the open door and patiently wait for you to step inside. Any sane person would be sprinting for the nearest airport. Instead, the camera captures the agonizing tragedy of captivity taking the wheel. Clara rises onto her toes, closing the distance between them. She brushes her trembling lips against his, sealing her fate. That fragile act of submission shatters his restraint. Lorenzo grabs her, crushing her against his chest in a terrifying mix of dominance and sick tenderness. She surrenders entirely, her hands clutching at his neck as if she were drowning in the ocean below. When they pull apart, his eyes are pitch black, unreadable voids. He warns her to be absolutely certain of this choice. The hard lesson we see here is devastating. We often lock our own cages because we desperately mistake a dangerous, violent intensity for true, genuine love. Now we arrive at the point of no return. Lorenzo looks her dead in the eye and vows that if they cross this line, he will never let her go. It is a literal, terrifying threat that should have sent her running. Instead, it floods her brain like pure dopamine. She breathes out that she is certain. He pulls her into the isolated wing of his compound, into a fortified bedroom staring out at the black water. This is where the bond is physically cemented. They collapse onto the mattress in a tangle of shadows, his rough hands pushing away the silk of her dress. The cinematic lighting makes it look like a sweeping romance, but you must look closer. The harsh life lesson here is undeniable. Total consumption is never the same thing as affection. The predator just devoured his willing prey. Let us slow down and watch this dark bond take root. Lorenzo whispers sweet praises against Clara's skin, systematically short-circuiting her logic. He confesses his obsession with her. Clara feels this massive physical pull and begins unbuttoning his shirt. But the moment the dark fabric drops, the romantic fantasy cracks. His chest is covered in brutal, raised scars. She gently touches one on his ribs, and he casually brushes it off as a bloody knife fight in Moscow. That terrifying detail alone should have her sprinting for a taxi. Instead, her biology completely overrides her common sense. It is a slow, tragic collapse. The simple, harsh life lesson here is laid out perfectly. Intense physical chemistry can easily blind us to our most basic, vital survival instincts. Watch how the predator meticulously builds fake security. Lorenzo grabs the zipper of her dress, but intentionally stops. He makes deep eye contact and patiently waits for her nod. It is a chilling illusion of consent from a man who takes whatever he wants by force. He pulls the fabric down slowly, trading his usual violence for a calculated tenderness. He treats her like fragile art, silently asking permission for every touch. Later, as she rests her head on his scarred chest, he traces slow circles on her back. Clara feels this heavy, narcotic peace wash over her exhausted mind. It breaks your heart, because that peace is just the cage door locking shut. The ultimate life lesson is undeniably clear. Finding false safety in the arms of your greatest threat is exactly how you lose yourself completely. The mental dissonance in Clara's head right now is staggering. Her logic is screaming to panic, yet she feels this bizarre sense of true belonging. Lorenzo kisses her temple in the dim light, asking what she is thinking. She quietly admits she should be terrified of him. His reaction is a dark, cinematic masterpiece. He tightens his grip and promises she has nothing to fear from him. She knows he runs a violent syndicate. She knows his bloody history, but she actively chooses to swallow the beautiful lie. She falls asleep in the arms of a literal murderer, convinced that belonging to him is destiny. The devastating life lesson here is profound. Even the sharpest minds will happily rewrite reality when the human need to feel protected and loved becomes desperate enough. Look at the sheer genius of his isolation tactics. The camera finds Clara waking up alone. The bedroom windows have electronically frosted over, turning the suite into a glowing white box. She is sealed inside his world. Lorenzo is gone, leaving behind an order to eat breakfast and wait for his driver. Beside the note sits a small velvet box. Inside rests a gold chain with a diamond key pendant. She sits on the bed, watching the jewels shine in the cold morning light, feeling the heavy psychological weight of the gift. Is it a symbolic key to his dark heart, or the lock on her new cell? It does not matter. By wearing it, she is formally accepting her captivity. The timeless life lesson we always seem to forget is that the gilded cage is still a prison, no matter how beautifully it sparkles. Clara slips into his discarded dress shirt. It is a brilliant cinematic touch, watching her physically wrap herself in her captor's identity. Downstairs, the housekeeper waits with breakfast and coffee made exactly to Clara's preference. The kingpin literally profiled her coffee habits. Then the woman drops a full itinerary. Clara is going home to change, then having lunch with Lorenzo's sister. Let us pause here. This disorientation is entirely on purpose. He is flooding her with rapid plans, so she has zero time to construct boundaries. Yesterday, she did not even know he had a sister. The chilling life lesson is perfectly clear. When someone rushes to dismantle your reality, it is because they desperately want to build your new walls before you even notice you are trapped. Notice how he controls her communication, the ultimate power move. Clara reaches for her phone, realizing it was separated from her all night. The housekeeper hands back her bag, casually mentioning Lorenzo had to handle a sudden incident. The cold, deadpan way this woman talks about mob violence gives Clara a sharp flash of panic. She checks her screen, finding missed calls from her real life and a slick text from an unknown number. It is Lorenzo, charmingly apologizing for his absence and promising his sister will not bite. He is managing her fear via remote control, keeping confused but hopelessly smiling at her screen. The chilling life lesson to walk away with is absolute. Manufactured charm is always the deadliest weapon a true manipulator can ever wield. Let me set the scene for you. The camera holds on Clara, trapped in the back of a black sedan. Notice how the sheer thrill of the trap completely overrides her basic survival instincts. This man practically locks a diamond collar around her throat, ships her to a depressing apartment, and before she can even catch her breath, His driver is hauling her to an ultra-exclusive venue in Back Bay. The emotional whiplash is the entire point. He is deliberately starving her of the mental space to realize she is being hunted. The lighting shifts, casting long shadows across her face. Here is the brutal life lesson we all ignore. When someone rushes you into a fairy tale, they are usually trying to distract you from the nightmare. Clara is blindly riding this roller coaster right into the dark. The frame widens, bringing Isabella Falcone into sharp focus. Lorenzo's sister plays the sophisticated European aristocrat to absolute perfection. The tailored designer suit, the flawless hair, the warm, practiced smile. But if you watch the micro-expressions, right behind those dark eyes, she carries the exact same cold, dead predator stare as her brother. She is not here to be the welcoming family. She is a ruthless corporate auditor for the mob, sent to determine if Clara is a liability. The sad truth of life is that our most dangerous enemies rarely show up holding a weapon. Usually, they arrive buying us an expensive lunch and pretending to be our closest confidant. The clink of crystal glasses masks the sound of a closing trap. The camera pushes in slowly across the pristine white tablecloth. This entire lunch is a cinematic masterclass in psychological bullying, elegantly dressed up as high society manners. Isabella does not even allow Clara to look at a menu. She simply orders a vintage wine, a subtle, calculated flex to establish who holds the leash. When Clara tries to pump the brakes, nervously pointing out she only met Lorenzo 2 days ago, Isabella waves the concern away with a diamond-heavy wrist. She dismisses her brother's obsession as mere impulse. It breaks your heart to watch her fold. The life lesson here? Never let anyone make you feel crazy for needing time. The moment someone dismisses your boundaries as an inconvenience, they are already planning to break them entirely. The lighting grows a fraction colder as Isabella goes straight for the throat. She leans in, demanding to know what magic trick Clara used to hook the city's most ruthless syndicate leader. Clara shrinks into a chair. She claims she is nobody special, which is exactly the bleeding wound a family of predators is looking to exploit. Clara practically chokes on the expensive wine, pointing out the absurdity of interrogating the hostage instead of the man who locked the door. Isabella just gives this fake, chilling smile. It is a harsh reminder. Manipulative people will always make you answer for the chaos they created, setting your house on fire and asking why you brought the matches is the most agonizing psychological flip in the entire narrative. Isabella sits perfectly still and paints Lorenzo, a literal mob boss, as the poor, vulnerable victim of his own empire. And the tragic part is, Lorenzo probably believes this twisted myth himself. He thinks his massive wealth is a curse that isolates him from humanity. Isabella scans Clara's face like a polygraph, asking if she truly understands the violent reality of Lorenzo's world. Clara, breaking our hearts with her naive honesty, admits she kind of does. She knows the risk, but she slept in his bed anyway. The painful life lesson here is that you cannot save a broken person with your innocence. Knowing the stove is hot does not make the burns hurt any less when you willingly touch the metal. You and I need to look closely at this exact frame, because this is the very second the trauma bond locks into place. Isabella casually mentions that a smart, rational girl would have run screaming in the opposite direction by now. When Clara jokingly calls herself stupid, Isabella hits her with the devastating truth. It is not stupidity at all. It is that absolute, terrifying power is incredibly intoxicating. Clara squirms under the harsh restaurant lights, hating how easily this woman is dissecting her soul. Then Isabella slaps the label of love onto the situation, validating a 48-hour hostage crisis as epic romance. Listen, the hardest lesson to learn is that adrenaline is not affection. A racing heart just means you are in mortal danger, not falling in love. Once the emotional hooks are buried deep, Isabella seamlessly switches to the sympathetic routine. Over a plate of gold leaf tiramisu, she starts asking about Clara's writing dreams, acting like they are just two old friends catching up. Clara softens, admitting she expected a crude gangster stereotype, not a cultured aristocrat. Isabella just smiles, completely unbothered by the criminal label. Though then she drops the ultimate snare. Too soft, mentions that Lorenzo trusts absolutely no one in this world. The camera captures Clara's breath catching in her throat. She instantly feels like the chosen one. We all desperately want to believe we are the exception to the rule. But the tragedy is, if someone is a monster to the entire world, they will eventually be a monster to you. The ambient noise fades out as Clara tentatively asks about the family business. Isabella openly admits she runs the so-called legitimate side of things, the luxury real estate, the high-end restaurants, the massive money laundering operations required to wash the blood off their cash. You can visibly see a freezing chill run right down Clara's spine. This polished, elegant woman is just as drenched in sin as the men holding the guns. Isabella stares right through her and asks where Clara sees herself fitting into this nightmare. Clara is completely overwhelmed. She whispers that she does not know. The lesson here is brutal. If you do not define your own boundaries early on, ruthless people will happily define them for you, and you will absolutely hate the cage they build. It is physically painful to watch this scene unfold, because Isabella is practically handing Clara the instruction manual to her own destruction. She openly warns that Lorenzo operates like a classic megalomaniac. He sees a shiny object, he conquers it, and he locks it away in the dark. Yet she brilliantly plants this tiny seed of doubt, making Clara think this dangerous man is terrified of losing her. Suddenly, Isabella's phone screen lights up with a text summoning them to an art gallery. Clara immediately shrinks back into her seat, feeling completely out of her depth. The everyday truth is, manipulators thrive on keeping you permanently off balance. When you feel completely inadequate and unsure of your footing, you are infinitely easier for them to mold and control. The scene cuts to a converted warehouse, and this is the part that makes you want to yell at the screen. Clara knows exactly what is happening. The man is pre-selecting her wardrobe and shipping her to specific coordinates like an insured package. A healthy person would be sprinting for the nearest exit, but Clara is riding a massive wave of dark adrenaline. Lorenzo's suffocating wealth has completely short-circuited her survival instincts. Isabella marches her past the floating trays of champagne and straight into a private VIP room. Inside hangs a single rack of expensive dresses, all bearing Clara's name. The brutal life lesson here is simple and visually stark. A cage is still a cage, no matter how much gold they use to paint the heavy iron bars. The heavy wooden door clicks shut. Isabella leaves Clara entirely isolated with this psychological uniform. It is a stunning black cocktail dress, mathematically designed to draw attention straight to that diamond key locked around her throat. Sure, there are other dresses on the rack offering this sick illusion of free will, but Clara knows exactly what the boss wants her to wear. She slips the silk over her shoulders, looks into the full-length mirror, and the innocent girl from the third-floor apartment is completely gone. She feels this artificial, intoxicating surge of power washing over her. It is heartbreaking to witness. The ultimate lesson of losing yourself is that the devil rarely has to force you into chains. Let's look at this piece by piece, shall we? Clara steps into the gallery in her new armor, receiving a cold nod of approval from Isabella. They run interference to prevent Lorenzo from turning a nearby artist into a bloody exhibit. Isabella mentions a mob debt, like she is complaining about the weather. Here is the magic trick of the underworld. Clara is actively warping her moral compass just to survive. Then he steps into the frame. Lorenzo moves like a shark gliding through a tank of guppies. In a hall packed with billionaires, he carries the suffocating gravity of a god deciding who breathes and who bleeds. The sobering life lesson is inescapable. If you choose to stand close to the devil's fire for too long, you eventually stop noticing the intense heat. The camera angle violently tilts. Lorenzo is openly terrorizing a painter, his goons hovering in the shadows. But the second his dark eyes lock onto Clara, all the air is sucked from the room. A narcissist possesses this terrifying ability to vaporize the rest of the world when they trust spot their favorite possession. He strides across the floor, grabs her, and delivers a consuming kiss in front of the horrified crowd. Do not be fooled. This is no romantic reunion. This is a predator marking his territory. Clara does not pull away from the spectacle. She melts into the crushing pressure, her old identity fading into dust. He whispers his devotion, his voice wrapping around her throat. The bitter life lesson is clear. Sometimes the most inescapable prisons on earth are built entirely out of sweet words. Clara stirs in the dim light, murmuring softly that he should have woken her. The camera lingers on Lorenzo as his hand slides heavily down to the base of her spine. Let us examine this frame together. This is not romance. It is a brand, a silent declaration that she is his property. His sister watches from the shadows, her smirk sharp as she mentions lunch. Lorenzo slowly turns, fixing his own blood with a glare so chilling it stops time itself. No one deviates from his script. The second she retreats, his harsh features soften, the cold predator instantly shifting back into the gentle savior. It is a devastating reality of the human heart. Sometimes the very hands pulling you desperately from the flames belong to the exact man who struck the fatal match. Scene shifts to a tense quiet. Clara attempts to gently probe the terrifying reality of his criminal underworld, whispering a dark secret the housekeeper let slip. The lighting turns cold. Lorenzo slams an invisible door in her face, an impenetrable wall of glass she is forbidden to touch. Panicking under his sudden distance, she retreats to safety, asking how he knew her exact dress size. The camera pushes in close. He leans forward, his deep voice dripping with calculated vulnerability as he claims he only pays attention to what truly matters. You can almost hear her heart skip a beat. It is a modern tragedy. She looks into the obsessive, suffocating eyes of a monster and mistakes his absolute control for a beautiful fairy tale. We must remember this brutal truth. Mere attention does not always equal genuine affection. This is the tragic moment her reality begins to shatter. The camera captures Clara trembling, her chest tight with a dizzying mix of pure terror and intoxicating thrill. That chemical rush is the dark foundation of a trauma bond. Lorenzo grips her hand, parading her through the gleaming art gallery, while his armed guards form a human wall. He studies the abstract canvases with the exact same ruthless calculation he uses to command his empire. The patrons stare in breathless silence. When Clara nervously whispers about the heavy gazes, Lorenzo brushes her fear aside with pure arrogance. A king requires an audience, and he is displaying his fragile new prize under the spotlights. True love is meant to be a sanctuary that protects you from the glaring world. It should never place you on a lonely pedestal merely to feed a massive ego. Hearing that low, possessive growl rumble from his chest sends a visible shiver down Clara's spine. In this beautifully lit frame, the realization hits her. This shadow is silently consuming every corner of her life. Just as they pause before a massive canvas of sweeping blues and golds, the delicate tension shatters. A striking woman stands in their path, her knuckles stark white as she grips her glass. When Clara nervously asks who she is, Lorenzo immediately degrades the woman, reducing her to a worthless mistake from his dark past. As Elena marches toward them, the final stage of the toxic cycle reveals itself. Let us remember a simple law of human nature. When a man casually destroys the name of a woman he once loved, you are merely watching a devastating preview of your own future. Elena steps into the frame, forcing a painfully brittle smile, but Lorenzo gives her nothing in return. His dark eyes are a dead, unfeeling void. He introduces Elena to Clara as a mere passing acquaintance. The camera catches the sheer devastation washing over Elena's face as her entire history is erased with one callous breath. Desperate to fracture his icy control, she draws her only weapon. She speaks of a diamond ring, locking her wet eyes onto Clara to warn her of the jagged cliff ahead. She declares that once the shiny illusion fades, Clara will be discarded to the exact same ruins. It is a haunting image, a wounded ghost screaming across the void to save the next victim. The most agonizing part of our existence is that we rarely heed the glaring red flags until we are already in free fall. Lorenzo leans in, his voice dropping to a terrifying velvet whisper. Right on his silent cue, his suited enforcers close the physical gap, trapping the two women in a cage of shadows. It is a masterful reminder that beneath the tailored silk, he is a man capable of making anyone disappear. Recognizing the lethal shift, Elena retreats, leaving Clara with one final, haunting prophecy. Everything this ruthless kingpin touches will inevitably burn to ash. As she fades into the crowd, Lorenzo instantly adjusts his flawless mask, pouring out smooth apologies. But the camera lingers on Clara's trembling hands. A tiny spark of survival flickers in her chest as she finally asks if the ring actually exists. It is a universal truth. Once a single seed of doubt is planted in the human heart, no amount of sweet deception can ever uproot it. You and I are finally witnessing the first fracture in his polished armor. Lorenzo's jaw tightens as he coldly claims the ring was a meaningless trinket for an unstable ex. It is the darkest trick in the manipulator's playbook, painting the soul you destroyed as the villain. He forcefully shuts the interrogation down. A wave of cold panic washes over Clara as she senses her own tragic expiration date. Seeing her urge to pull away, Lorenzo steps in, trapping her delicate face between his hands. He feeds her the intoxicating lie that their bond is entirely different. When she whispers that they are still strangers, he smiles like a demon holding the deed to her soul. Engrave this lesson into your mind. Genuine love gives you the open sky to breathe, but absolute control demands every last breath in your lungs. The camera holds steady on his unblinking eyes as his rough thumbs slowly trace the lines of her cheekbones. The lighting grows dangerously intimate as he whispers they have belonged to each other since every second he saw her. To a clear mind, these are the blaring sirens of a predator. But the tragic grip of Stockholm Syndrome has already sunk its teeth into her heart. Instead of fleeing, Clara closes her eyes, surrendering to an intense, dizzying thrill. She tragically convinces herself that being held captive by a ruthless crime lord is written in the stars. Seeing her brainwashed once more, Lorenzo sweeps her out of the gallery without a single word to his family or their host. He has successfully severed her ties to the outside world. Never forget how this tragic descent begins. Isolation is always the very first heavy iron lock placed on the cage. Let us pause and watch exactly how Clara is removed from that gallery. Notice the meticulous blocking. Lorenzo completely isolates her, dragging her through the deep shadows of his tinted car and into a vast, empty hallway where his power is absolute. He forcefully presses her spine against the cold wall. It may look like fiery passion, but it is a sheer display of physical dominance. As he whispers about the key resting against her collarbone, he is chaining her mind to an object. He overwhelms her delicate senses so completely that she mistakes his aggressive cage for a warm embrace. She is tragically blind to the cold steel of this trap. It breaks your heart to watch a soul surrender so willingly. We often convince ourselves we are finding sanctuary inside a beautiful castle, completely ignoring that the golden bars are locked securely from the outside. The lighting dims as he softly whispers that this key unlocks the hidden chambers of his ruined soul. It is a terrifying masterclass in fabricated vulnerability. Men who command criminal empires do not freely hand out trust. They forge it into a weapon to purchase blind loyalty. By convincing Clara she is the sole exception to his madness, he permanently anchors her. As they cross that irreversible physical line, the camera blurs, mirroring the warm, drugger-like euphoria Clara feels resting against his heartbeat. It is gut-wrenching to witness. This is the tragic climax, where the trauma bond violently snaps shut. She is staring at her captor and hallucinating a noble protector. We must face a devastating reality. Sometimes the most dangerous lies we will ever encounter are the ones we whisper to ourselves just to feel safe in the dark. The camera pushes into a tight close-up of Clara's conflicted eyes. If we could hear her mind, it would be a deafening siren warning her to run. She even breathes the truth out loud, admitting with a trembling lip that falling this fast is pure madness. Lorenzo's face remains carved in stone as he orders her to stop thinking and merely feel. You and I recognize this psychological trap immediately. He is commanding her to deliberately shut off the analytical part of her brain, drowning her survival instinct in the addictive rush he provides. He fully understands that 1 second of clarity would send her flying out the door. It is a profound tragedy watching a woman willingly surrender her own mind. It leaves us with a chilling lesson. A quieted mind is effortlessly conquered, which is exactly why you must never allow another human being to silence your own fierce intuition. For one agonizing beat, the ghostly warning of Alina echoes in the hollows of Clara's mind. It is the terrifying reality that men like Lorenzo will inevitably discard their broken toys the second the amusement fades. Her voice shakes as she asks what he truly wants from her. His answer is a low rumble that makes the blood run cold. He demands everything, every waking minute of her day, her entire existence. Any soul not blinded by a trauma bond would hear that sentence and sprint into the night. He is not searching for an equal partner. He is planting a dark flag, claiming eternal ownership over her soul. This is the romantic fairy tale curdled into a suffocating nightmare. The tragic truth we must always cling to is simple. True love is the quiet work of building a beautiful life together. It is never the slow erasure of one beating heart just to keep a monster perfectly fed. The camera lingers on Clara, capturing the moment her instinct to flee collapses. Her deepest insecurities rush to meet him in the dim light. She carries a desperate need to simply matter to someone. Lorenzo maps the broken fragments of her soul, pouring his dark presence into every crack. When she whispers about the violence trailing him, he plays his deadliest card, softly promising to keep her safe. He paints the outside world as a den of monsters, positioning himself as the heavy iron door between her and ruin. He orchestrates the terror, then sells her the sanctuary. You and I are watching a slow, beautiful tragedy unfold. The lesson we must carry from this is cold but true. The darkest predators memorize the exact shape of our empty spaces, using our deepest desires to bind us. Let us freeze the frame and listen to the cold gravel in his voice. He murmurs, "I protect what is mine." The shadows across his face reveal the terrifying truth. That is no tender romantic vow. It is a chilling inventory check. He is silently placing a barcode on her soul, stripping away her humanity. But Clara, shivering in the cold reality of his violent world, closes her eyes and absorbs it as a beautiful promise. We watch her hand over the heavy keys to her free will, completely blind to the tragic transaction. It shatters the heart, because the man offering to be her shield is the exact monster she needs protection from. They stand bathed in a fatal, melancholic glow. Here is a vital truth to hold on to. Genuine safety will never demand that you surrender your absolute freedom. Watch the calculated rhythm of his breath as he whispers for her not to decide tonight. It is a dark magic trick, offering a fragile illusion of choice to paralyze her instinct to flee. The scene cuts to the pale morning light, and his romantic mask shatters. Lorenzo sits perfectly still, armored in a dark tailored suit, his eyes locked on her defenseless sleeping form. The camera angle emphasizes his sheer dominance. This is a cold power move. He is marking his territory, establishing himself as the sleepless predator guarding a bird in a glass cage. The framing captures the silent, aching death of her independence. The lesson woven into this tragedy is absolute. When someone demands your bare vulnerability while remaining fiercely guarded themselves, they are preparing to conquer you. The steel trap snaps shut with the gentle click of a velvet gift box. Inside rests a heavy brass key to a towering penthouse. The lighting shifts, growing sterile and cold. Clara offers a trembling resistance, whispering that she has her own home. But a man driven by obsessive darkness cannot stomach a sanctuary he does not rule. His jaw tightens as he verbally tears down her apartment, branding it unsafe and unworthy. He demands she retreat into his concrete fortress, where his suffocating wealth will dictate the very air she breathes. She smiles, tragically believing she is being swept into a grand romance, while her independent soul is quietly buried alive. The bitter life lesson echoes through the empty halls. When someone provides everything, they decide what you can keep. You and I need to observe the masterful cruelty of his isolation tactic. The camera pushes in as he lowers his voice, dropping vague, chilling threats about unseen enemies roaming the shadows. This is the dark poetry of a master controller. By painting the city below as a canvas of invisible terror, he transforms his high-rise penthouse into the only sanctuary on Earth. He is weaponizing the very violence he created to crush the last trembling embers of her resistance. Now, Clara stands at a tragic crossroads, forced to choose between the terrifying unknown of the streets and the velvet-lined luxury of her captor's cage. He watches her eyes dart, already knowing her spirit will break. The heavy lesson here is undeniable. Fear is the fastest way to convince someone to lock their own cell. The true horror lies in the elegance of his manipulation. He never shouts an order instead. His broad shoulders slump as he begs her, framing her surrender as a desperate favor for his own peace of mind. He gently places the agonizing weight of his survival onto her fragile shoulders, and the camera catches the tearful second Clara caves, her trembling fingers close around that heavy brass key, crossing the tragic threshold from an independent woman to a possessed object. His posture instantly straightens, the hidden relief of a warden hearing the final lock click. Instantly, the looming shadow of his enforcer, Enzo, is dispatched to erase her old life before she can breathe. We are left with a devastating lesson. A soul is most easily trapped when it believes it acts out of pure love. The camera sweeps into a muted bubble of extreme wealth. Clara floats high above the clouds, insulated by tinted windows and armed guards. Let the lens linger on the massive master closet. It hangs heavy with rows of brand new designer silk, already tailored to her exact measurements. The musical score turns unsettling, revealing the sickness beneath the luxury. He is systematically erasing the woman she was, dressing his porcelain doll to his obsessive specifications. Drowning in the intoxicating depths of a trauma bond, Clara touches the fabrics, mistaking his absolute control for profound thoughtfulness. Her identity bleeds out, one expensive thread at a time. The haunting life lesson remains. Genuine generosity elevates your spirit, but calculated gifts demand your permanent obedience. The extraction unfolds with the dead efficiency of a midnight raid. The silence is suffocating. As Enzo stands motionless, a grim statue watching Clara cram her independent existence into a single, pathetic duffel bag, her trembling hands clutch a laptop and a faded photograph of her father holding onto the final scraps of her history. You and I must recognize the gravity of this exact frame. The very second her foot crosses the threshold of his private elevator, her old world turns to ash. Despite the breathtaking architecture of the penthouse waiting above, it remains nothing more than a solitary confinement cell suspended in the clouds. The brutal truth of this tragedy is clear. Leaving your past behind becomes a fatal mistake the moment a dark controller takes absolute ownership of your future. The camera pulls back, completely dwarfing Clara inside the sweeping, sterile geometry of her high-rise prison. The penthouse mimics a modern art museum, bathed in lifeless light that makes the air feel visually freezing. Every mahogany pantry overflows with decadent wine, perfectly painting the cinematic image of a gilded cage. Watch the microscopic shift in her expression. A fleeting shadow of terror crosses her wide eyes as the irreversible reality sets in. She is being meticulously cared for, yet she has become nothing more than a beautiful, captive bird preserved for a megalomaniac's private viewing. The heartbreaking lesson is etched into every marble surface of this scene. No matter how flawlessly a golden cage fits your measurements, its only true purpose is to ensure you never fly. A melancholy blue light reflects in Clara's eyes as she stares over the vast city. The jarring buzz of her phone shatters the quiet. Lorenzo's name flashes, a calculated message asking if she is happy. Her fingers tremble as she types back that it is beautiful but hollow without him. His reply strikes with lethal precision, whispering that he misses her and that this grand empire is hers. It is agonizing to witness the emotional hook tear deep into her chest. That toxic rush of dopamine completely buries her surviving instincts. Just 3 sunrises ago, she was a fierce woman fighting for rent. Now, she is a ghost haunting a palace, breathless for a predator's affection. The tragic lesson bleeds through the screen. True safety is never achieved by trading your fundamental right to exist. The camera captures the slow asphyxiation of this seductive trap. The penthouse wraps around her like a velvet blanket of false security, silently suffocating her independence. She wanders the halls, clutching that cold brass key like a sacred relic, anchoring her mind deeper into his sickness. 3 days dissolve into a hazy montage. She drifts across the marble floors like a grieving ghost, sleeping in his bed, inhaling his toxic shadow. Her only tether to sanity is the glow of his sporadic messages, promising he's controlling the chaos. When a towering arrangement of blood-red roses arrives to pacify her panic, the perfection of his isolation strategy becomes terrifying. The life lesson here is a dark warning. Always beware of the exquisite gifts designed to sever your ties to the living. The silence of her high-altitude prison shatters on the 3rd day with a frantic call. Isabella, his sister, delivers a trembling message that things have grown dangerously complicated. The camera pushes in on Clara as she begs for salvation, her voice cracking as she admits she is losing her mind inside this box. But Isabella's response turns the blood to ice. She whispers that this captivity is exactly what Lorenzo orchestrated. Hearing the raw panic vibrating in the sister's voice, Clara demands the ugly truth. Isabella's defenses crumble, revealing a bloody assassination attempt on Lorenzo's life. The jarring wake-up call reverberates through the sterile penthouse walls. The life lesson here must be etched into our minds. Extreme secrecy in romance is built to protect a monster's lies. Step into the frame with me as this tragedy unfolds. Notice the chilling stillness in Isabella when she says the attackers have been dealt with, a sterile phrase concealing cold-blooded murder. The camera captures a fleeting tremor of primal terror in Clara, but then the mechanics of her trauma bond grind into motion, instantly smothering her instinct to flee. The cage door is wide open, yet she rejects her freedom, begging only to see her captor. Isabella watches with quiet pity, knowing this absolute surrender perfectly feeds his dark ego. The bitter life lesson lingering in the shadows here is undeniable. Feeling profound, weeping fear for a monster does not magically transform them into a merciful saint. The psychological gymnastics she performs to survive this moment are nothing short of tragic. Clara knows rival hitmen tried to gun Lorenzo down in the streets, and she knows he is likely bleeding somewhere in the dark city. Yet her mind beautifully twists his terrifying absence into a noble sacrifice, blinding her to the harsh reality that she is merely a pawn on his chessboard. By the dawn of the 4th day, the silence becomes a suffocating weight. The camera follows her to the private gym. She runs on the treadmill until her lungs burn, desperately chasing the illusion of escape. But look at the framing. She never steps outside the glass walls of her gorgeous prison. The heartbreaking lesson echoes with every footfall. All the physical momentum in the world can never outrun true psychological captivity. Let the camera linger on the shadowed apartment. A sudden chill sweeps down Clara's spine. She turns, and there stands Lorenzo, heavily blocking her only exit. He stares with the exhausted triumph of a warlord. But notice his calculated wardrobe. He wears a soft, dark sweater, intentionally framing the brutal purple bruise on his jaw. It is a masterpiece of playing the vulnerable victim. A rational person would sprint for the fire escape, but Clara remains frozen, paralyzed by a blinding storm of relief and agonizing loneliness. He crosses the floor and swallows her in a massive embrace. She caves instantly, dropping her weapons without a single protest. The harsh lesson of the scene is clear. A monster looking hurt is exactly when they are most dangerous to your fragile heart. You and I must look closer at the quiet violence of this embrace. Watch how quickly she surrenders. She whispers her relief that he is safe, treating him like the victim. He simply squeezes tighter, his massive arms acting as both a shield and a snare. He feeds her a gentle lie about staying away for her safety. But the moment she reveals Isabella told her about the hit, the romantic lighting shatters. Pause the frame and study his eyes. For 1 microsecond, lethal fury flashes across his face because he lost control of his crafted script. He instantly covers it with a heavy sigh, claiming he merely wanted to protect her from the darkness. The painful lesson burns brightly here. Total manipulation almost always wears the shining, heavy armor of pure protection. The cruelty of his performance is breathtaking, wrapping his poison in a beautiful ribbon of concern. He claims he kept her in the dark only to give her plausible deniability. When she demands to know the fate of the hitman, the warmth drains from his voice. He snaps the door shut, insisting it is a world she cannot touch. The unspoken truth hangs heavy. This ruthless king did not merely survive, he turned his enemies into ghosts. A sickening realization hits Clara. She demands to go upstairs, and he plays the perfect gentleman. The second she is alone, she steps under scalding water, scrubbing her trembling skin. The brutal life lesson washes over her. You can scrub until you bleed, but you can never wash away the darkness you actively choose to invite into your home. The camera shifts to the doorway, and the atmospheric tension is absolutely suffocating. Lorenzo has perfectly dressed the set for his next act. He stands dead center, holding 2 heavy glasses of amber whiskey. Clara downs the burning liquid, begging for the raw truth. Watch the subtle tightening of his jaw as he calculates exactly how much horror her mind can digest. He frames a bloody cartel war as a mere disagreement over territory. Look past the dialogue and focus on his hands. He swirls the ice in his glass with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, completely still while describing a heavily armed death squad. The life lesson in this frame is terrifying. When a monster removes their mask, you must watch the fresh blood on their hands, not the gentle melody of their charming voice. Stay close with me for this moment, because it will shatter your heart. The room falls dead silent as he casually explains a third assassin fired a single shot. Lost in the heavy fog of her captivity, Clara reaches out, her trembling fingers tracing the dark bruise on his jaw. He smoothly blames the injury on shattered glass. But when she asks about the men who ordered the attack, a terrifying emptiness fills his eyes. He softly promises they will never send another soul. That freezing certainty should send her running. Instead, she stays, desperately trying to find a loving man inside a cold executioner. The vital life lesson we must learn is this: your deepest love will never be a magic cure for a person who has completely hollowed out their own empathy. This man constructed an empire on broken bones and silenced screams. The tragic realization finally breaks through Clara's denial. She whispers the truth, recognizing that loving him means living inside a bloody war zone. He does not deny it. He simply covers her pale hand with his heavy palm, a quiet physical reminder of who holds the power. He refuses to pretend he is a savior. Clara pulls away, walking slowly toward the massive penthouse windows. The city lights glow far below, but her psychological cage is already bolted shut. Staring at her own faint reflection in the cold glass, she begs for one last drop of honesty. The painful life lesson staring us right in the face is undeniable. Asking a master manipulator for the truth only ever buys you a much more sophisticated lie. Watch her desperate attempt to tear down his walls. She demands reality, ignoring the hollow comforts she used to crave. Tension vibrates in her shoulders as she quietly asks what he would do if she walked out that heavy door forever. The man deserves a standing ovation. He manufactures a flawless, agonizing flicker of heartbreak. He softly promises he would let her go, offering to secure her future with endless wealth. When she asks if he would lock her away, he wears the mask of a wounded martyr, deeply offended by her lack of faith. In that moment, the steel trap of his manipulation snaps completely shut. The profound life lesson to take away from this tragedy is chilling. Giving someone the total illusion of a free choice is the absolute heaviest chain you can ever forge around their neck. Let us step back and look at this destruction together. You and I are witnessing the agonizing birth of a trauma bond. Clara is twisting her mind into knots, frantic to paint a pure heart onto a ruthless kingpin. His life is a symphony of violence, yet she clings to a crumbling fairy tale. Her breath hitches as she admits she is terrified of the explosions waiting to go off around him. Lorenzo closes the physical distance. He does not touch her. He merely uses his dark silhouette to consume all the oxygen in the room. He effortlessly flips the script, acting as though her natural survival instinct is a tragic flaw, bragging that he wakes up ready to die. The critical life lesson here is brutally clear. True predators do not actually feel fear. They simply weaponize it against the deeply innocent people who do. Observe how he spins his empire of death into a dark romance. It is a masterclass in isolating his prey. Clara realizes his confession has finally demolished her last wall. Remember when she fiercely fought back, calling his life total madness? Now, staring into the abyss of his eyes, she is paralyzed. Tears spill as she actually apologizes for lacking the stomach to be his lover. Lorenzo instantly strikes with positive reinforcement. He traces her jawline like she is fragile glass, whispering that she is secretly stronger than she knows. The invisible leash pulls tight as she quietly begs for a minute to breathe. The heavy life lesson here is impossible to ignore. The devil does not drag you kicking into the dark. He simply holds your hand while you willingly walk yourself there. Picture the frame with me. The lighting is perfectly dim, casting sharp shadows across the room as Lorenzo plays his final psychological card. His voice drops into a quiet register, offering to pack his bags and vanish into the cold night. It is checkmate. The sudden threat of abandonment plunges Clara into easy isolation he carefully built around her. Her nervous system completely shatters. Trembling hands reach out, catching the fabric of his dark suit. She actually begs the monster to stay. The smug relief washing over his face is utterly tragic. He pulls her into a crushing embrace, sealing their dark fate. The heavy lesson to remember? The absolute hardest cage to escape is the one you actually beg your captor not to open. The camera lingers on the tangled silk sheets. This intimacy is frantic, a biological scream to survive the grim reaper sharing her bed. In the quiet darkness, Clara slowly traces the purple bruises across his chest, physically reading the map of his violent world. He whispers heavy promises of protection, a steady rhythm of pure brainwashing. But later, listening to the slow, terrifying thud of his heartbeat, the devastating reality washes over her. She just signed away her soul. We all face forks in the road, though rarely with a body count attached. Lorenzo senses the shift in her breathing and instantly invades her quiet thoughts. It is a deeply tragic rule of life. Make one small compromise with the darkness, and it will eventually cost you the sun. The scene shifts to a tense, suffocating standoff. Clara speaks of consequences, and Lorenzo goes completely, terrifyingly silent. You have to feel a tiny flicker of pity for him here. He paints a grim picture of taking over the crime family after his father died, framing it as a tragic fate. In his twisted mind, he had to become a monster to keep his bloodline breathing. But as the words leave his mouth, his hand grips her arm just a fraction too tight. The physical threat bleeds right through the romance. He promises her a kingdom of pure luxury, entirely ignoring the invisible chains and hidden cameras tracking her every step. It brings us to a vital life lesson. When someone offers you a golden castle, make sure it does not lock from the inside. Notice the tight framing as Lorenzo forces her chin up, demanding she look into his eyes. He says that loving him means swallowing his violence whole. When she pushes back, he lets a fake flicker of sorrow cross his face. He offers her a massive fortune to walk away, fully aware her fierce pride will reject the bloody cash. A slow smile creeps onto his lips, turning her noble rejection into proof of their tragic bond. He drops the word love into the dead air like a tactical strike. As her voice shakes, repeating the cursed word back to him, he stands up, his shadow swallowing her tiny frame. It reminds us of a harsh truth. Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are just measuring us for a beautifully decorated cage. The camera circles them as he shifts gears into a deep, love-bombing routine. His voice softens, claiming a desperate obsession that started the second they locked eyes at a gala. He praises her for seeing the wounded boy beneath the monster, feeding his dark hunger. Clara tries to anchor herself with logic, arguing it is impossible to fall in love this fast. But he leans in close, asking if she felt the exact same magnetic pull. You can almost hear her mind snap. She fatally confuses the sheer terror of being hunted with the warmth of coming home. She whispers that she is terrified, knowing this invites destruction. She misses a critical life lesson here. True vulnerability requires an environment of actual safety, not just surrendering your soul to a smiling predator. Lorenzo leans in closer, the low lighting catching the sharp angles of his face. He spins his obsession as a massive strategic risk, one that dwarfs his criminal empire. He stares without blinking, freezing her in place. He whispers that the biggest gambles always pay the highest dividends. Staring at this lethal man, Clara finally stops fighting. She looks back at their history, tragically mistaking the adrenaline spike of surviving a predator for an epic romance. She actually says the words out loud, sealing her dark fate. Lorenzo drops his icy facade instantly. His face lights up with a sickeningly pure, boyish joy that makes your stomach turn. It is a devastating reminder that the absolute most dangerous lies in life are the ones we desperately want to tell ourselves. The moment she breaks, the lighting shifts warmer. He rewards her surrender with heart-wrenching tenderness. It is brutal psychological conditioning, carving his ownership into her brain. He makes her repeat the words, and the fight drains out of her eyes. Still, a tiny flicker of survival instinct remains. She begs for a lifeline, crying she cannot survive his bloody reality. Lorenzo promises to slowly numb her to the violence, asking only for absolute obedience in return. Clara agrees, but tries to draw a fragile line in the sand. She demands the truth about his operations, falsely believing the facts will protect her. But life is rarely that kind. Knowing the exact dimensions of the cage you are trapped in does not make you any less of a permanent prisoner. Lorenzo pauses, perfectly acting out the role of a burdened protector. The camera captures the calculated furrow of his brow. He argues that keeping her blind is the only way to keep a bullet out of her head. Clara pushes back, her voice trembling as she insists on knowing if rival guns are pointed at their door. The kingpin offers a slow nod, handing her the fake badge of an insider. As desperate to maintain her identity, Clara demands her own writing career and personal freedom. Lorenzo simply smiles at her. He loves that she still has a little bit of fire left in her chest. Life teaches us a very brutal lesson here. While a broken spirit is tragic, to a master manipulator, slowly taming a wild heart is the ultimate psychological trophy. You and I need to watch this devastating scene unfold frame by frame. He sees her ambition and immediately weaponizes it. Lorenzo promises to launch her writing career, claiming he will forge real connection instead of just buying a publisher. It is a masterclass in dark narcissism. He frames himself as the sole architect of her dreams. Clara has spent her life alone, so this powerful support feels like a miracle. She looks at him, genuinely believing they are building a partnership. She is entirely blind to the fact that he is replacing every independent pillar of her life with his own hands. It proves a terrifying point. The quickest way to completely own someone is to convince them you are the only one who can make their dreams come true. Lorenzo hits her with a chilling stare, forcing a final choice. The camera holds on Clara as she runs through the terrifying catalogue of violence she knows he commits. Yet, she actively chooses to step into the fire. She ties her survival to a man who destroys lives. The sharp relief on his face is not love. It is the cold satisfaction of a hunter turning the key on a cage. The film cuts forward 6 months. We find Clara on a balcony, staring at a community center she guilted him into funding to soothe her conscience. Her entire universe has violently shrunk down to fit the exact footprint of his illegal empire. The tragedy of life is clear. When you consistently compromise your core morals for safety, you eventually forget what you were even fighting for. Her book deal dematerializes, elevating Lorenzo to a dark god in her eyes. The scene paints a sickening picture as she shakes hands with his lieutenants, taking a seat inside the mafia food chain. She floats through elite parties, branded as his personal property. She hates the label, but happily wears the bulletproof armor it provides. This is the fatal stage of Stockholm Syndrome. We watch her perform mental gymnastics to justify the hidden cameras and the bloody money funding her lavish life. They fight constantly, explosive, screaming matches that serve as a twisted, emotional release valve before making up. The trauma bond pulls tight. It proves that sometimes the most toxic relationships disguise themselves as epic passion when they are really just a deeply destructive shared sickness. Let us examine this final frame together. Clara lies awake with insomnia, listening to the man she loves order executions from the next room. She gets flashes of moral clarity, wondering how she became partner to a monster, but she forcefully chokes those thoughts down. She clutches her book contract in the dark, telling herself it is proof of his respect. She thinks she is ruling a kingdom, blind to the fact she is polishing the gold on her cage. Lorenzo steps from the shadows, wrapping his arms around her from behind. He kisses her temple, reading her anxious thoughts in the glass. Her defensive walls are gone. He has consumed her reality. The hardest lesson of all: when you continually ignore your conscience to please someone else, you will inevitably lose your own mind. The scene cuts to 6 months later, and the brainwashing is complete. Clara sits on a velvet couch, leaning against the chest of the predator who consumed her life. She dismisses her past struggles with rent, intoxicated by a grand delusion of building a massive community center. This is textbook financial grooming. When Lorenzo softly asks if she has regrets, she looks up at him, utterly spellbound. She has convinced her fractured mind that a ruthless killer is uniquely gentle just for her. She smiles and claims zero regrets, blindly accepting the constant threat of a violent death as a simple tax for an epic life. The final lesson of this tragedy is devastating. You must never, under any circumstances, confuse your dangerous proximity to a powerful monster with genuine, unconditional safety. Watch closely as the camera pushes in on this brutal moment of conditioning. Heavy shadows cover Lorenzo's face as he perfectly matches her emotional frequency. He leans in, his voice dropping into a gravelly whisper about wanting more. The second she breathes out her surrender to his dark world, the trap officially snaps shut. He pulls out a velvet box, opening it to reveal a breathtaking emerald. Do not be fooled, because that ring is an incredibly expensive shackle. He asks her to be his wife, calling her his absolute equal, sealing her fate with the most devastating lie ever spoken. He locks down his captive using the flawless illusion of partnership. It brings us to a quiet, tragic realization about love and control. A beautifully decorated pedestal is ultimately just another type of prison. We are staring right into the terrifying climax of a complete psychological takeover. He proposes a marriage of equals, a brilliant deception masked overwhelming power imbalance. The camera lingers on Clara as she weeps, joyfully chaining herself to the exact man who erased her. Flash forward to the dressing room. Surrounded by his armed enforcers, she studies her reflection in the cold glass. The nervous woman from the gala 6 months ago is dead and buried. Her posture is rigidly straight. Her gaze is completely hollow and icy. The host identity has been wiped away, leaving only Lorenzo's perfectly obedient mirror. It forces us to face a truly haunting reality about human nature and survival. The absolute most effective prisons on Earth are always the ones the inmates desperately fight to defend. Let us pause the frame and take in the sheer tragedy of this scene. Clara sits in the back of an armored limousine, sipping a costly glass of champagne, lost in her own beautiful delusion. She has actually convinced herself that she chose this nightmare willingly. Lorenzo raises his crystal glass to toast their partnership, and she leans her head onto his shoulder as if he were her ultimate protector. It breaks your heart to watch. She truly believes this cold-blooded killer is her safe harbor, stitching his twisted narrative into her own armor. It is a harsh truth to accept, but it teaches us something incredibly profound about manipulation. The absolute worst kind of prison does not have iron bars or heavy doors, because the captive has been entirely trained to fight for the guard. Watch the subtle movement of her wrist as she raises her glass, smiling warmly at the very people who ruined her life. When Falcone looks into her eyes and says the word together, she hears a sweeping romance instead of a life sentence. Sitting at a table surrounded by ruthless mobsters, she listens to Giovanni laugh and Isabella joke about wedding dresses. Amidst this madness, Clara actually feels a profound sense of peace. The conditioning is complete. She thinks she belongs to a powerful man, blind to the horrifying reality that he simply owns her. She assumes he respects Sophia, unaware he has entirely smothered it. It leaves us with a dark but vital lesson about survival. People will adapt to living inside a waking nightmare, as long as everyone else in the room acts like it is a dream. This final cinematic shot will truly linger in your bones. The camera holds on Clara standing there, chin tilted high, boldly daring the world to come after them. She is prepared to take a bullet for the exact underworld that stole her freedom. That is the terrifying genius of Lorenzo. He did not just drag her into the shadows. He made her believe the darkness was her own beautiful idea. When she whispers to let them watch, She thinks she is a fierce, loyal queen. In reality, she is merely rattling the iron bars of a cage she can no longer see. It is a tragic conclusion, but it offers one vital lesson. The most inescapable traps in life are never built with heavy steel and concrete. They are built the very second we quietly surrender our minds to someone else. One of the strongest emotional elements in the story is the honesty between Clara and Lorenzo. Unlike the polished conversations at the gala, their private conversations become meaningful because both characters reveal painful truths. As Clara admits that she is afraid of ending up like her mother, alone and financially trapped after loving the wrong man. Lorenzo admits that he never wanted the criminal empire he inherited, and that he once dreamed of becoming an architect. These confessions make them human to each other. Clara stops seeing Lorenzo only as a feared mafia figure, and Lorenzo stops seeing Clara only as a beautiful stranger. This teaches an important educational lesson. Real connection begins when people dare to be honest. Many relationships remain shallow because people hide behind image, status, or fear of judgment. Clara and Lorenzo's bond deepens when they speak about loss, disappointment, ambition, and loneliness. However, honesty is not only about revealing pain, it also requires telling the truth about danger. Lorenzo admits that his life comes with risks, but he does not fully explain everything. Clara senses that some parts of his world remain hidden from her. This creates a second lesson. Emotional honesty must be matched by practical honesty. A person cannot ask for trust while hiding the realities that may affect someone's safety and future. In life, love and friendship require more than beautiful words. They require transparency, accountability, and the courage to let the other person make informed choices. Clara's honesty about her fits is brave, but she must also demand honesty from Lorenzo about what being with him truly means. The story reminds viewers that vulnerability can build intimacy, but incomplete truth can build danger. Real love should not only make someone feel understood, it should also give them enough truth to choose freely.